Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
Well, welcome to So Many Books, So Little Time. This is show 15. My name is Joe Nash, and I'm here with Zina, Shevchik. We're both librarians here at the Colonie Library. If you don't know our show, the premise is very simple. We go down to the new book shelf here in the library, and we go to our technical services department, where all the new books are being processed, and we brought up a bunch of new books to tell you about. And Zina usually goes first, but one quick thing first, Zina. I'm finding it harder to pick books now. There's so many books to go through. I was telling people several times we get about 100 books a week, so I'm finding it difficult to choose books these times.
Because there's so many good ones.
Yes,
right.
that's true.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Maybe at the end of the year, before Christmas, more good books are published or something. I don't know. Oops, I grabbed the wrong book. The first book I want to talk about has a local angle. It's an autobiography of sorts from a former news reporter and news broadcaster, Ed Daig, who worked at WRGB and then WNYT, Channel 13, for years. And the name of the book is 6 and 11, a television news anchor story. And 6 and 11 refers to the time of the news broadcast when he was on air. And I knew a little bit about him. I didn't know until toward the end of his career that he suffered from a severe and rare form of rheumatoid arthritis, and that a lot of the times when we were watching him, he was actually in a great deal of pain. It was interesting to learn about his early life, but also for me, it was fascinating to learn about actually how much work was involved, how much he did as a news anchor, a news reader, whatever, news reporter, what they did off screen, particularly since he was there at the beginning, kind of the beginning of television, when things were black and white and technical aspects of it were very raw and unsophisticated, and how busy they were right up until the newscast and all the technical aspects of it. He was trained as an electrical engineer, kind of because that's what he was expected to do by his family, and broadcasting at that time was not considered the glamorous occupation it is now. So it's a short book, and it's not straight chronological presentation of his life, but I highly recommend it. I have lived in this area all but 10 years of my life, and so he was a fixture in my living room for most of my life. So I think that locally there'll be a lot of people interested in this. 6 and 11, a television news anchor story. Joe?
Didn't he start as a newspaper guy?
He actually started at the station as a technical person.
I didn't know that.
And then he kind of fell into the reporting.
Oh, okay. Well, my first book is a book I've been reading amazingly great reviews of. I know I say that every show, it seems. But not just here in the publications we read, but I read several reviews online from newspapers and magazines in England. The author lives in London. This book is called, and it's also the kind of book I can't resist by the title, How to Live, or A Life of Montaigne in One Question and 20 Attempts at an Answer, by Sarah Bakewell. And again, this book's getting extraordinary reviews. What the book is, if you don't know anything of who Montaigne was, he's one of the first essayists, I think in the 1500s he wrote. He was famous, he was one of the first guys to I don't know what the term is, he plumbed his inner being and he started writing about his thoughts. He was one of the first people to do this, and he wrote I think, 107 essays, something like that. Not very long. Not, some of them are on big subjects like death and love and all this, but a lot of them are on everyday things. For example, one of his essays is called of, a lot of them begin with the word of thumbs, of smells, of coaches. I'm not sure what that means from the 1500s, but of names. So he wrote these little essays on all kinds of subjects, but he really was one of the first people to write about his own inner self, I guess.
It's self-analysis?
Yeah, one of the first, I guess.
Self-perception? Yeah.
So anyway, what the author has done is she's gone through all his essays, and it's sort of back and forth between the 20 questions. I'll tell you what a few of them are. And it's also a biography of Montaigne. So it looks very interesting, and like I say, it's been getting great reviews. But here's how the book is set up. The book is set up on 20 chapters. Each one, the question for each chapter is how to live, obviously the name of the book. And then she takes a theme from many of his essays and sort of expounds upon it, but then sort of goes into Montaigne's life and sort of goes along with that question. So for example, chapter 1, how to live. Don't worry about death. And then each of these chapters is like 10, 15 pages. Chapter 2, how to live. Pay attention. So you get the idea. Chapter 3, how to live, be born. Now that sounds funny, but obviously I think there's something to that. And I think Montaigne had some humor in some of his. I'll just read a couple of the other ones and you get the idea. And like I say, each chapter not only tries to answer that particular question from his essays, but it's a biography of him too. And again, really amazing. I think it won a prize in England for something. How to live, chapter 4. Read a lot, forget most of what you read, and be slow-witted. So, survive love and loss, use little tricks. Let's see. I'm not sure what this looks like an interesting one. Chapter 8, how to live. Keep a private room behind the shop. I'm not sure what that. Wake up from the sleep of habit. Guard your humanity. Do something no one has ever done before. How to live, chapter 17. Reflect on everything, regret nothing. So I think you get the idea. So this looks like a very interesting book, and I've read totally amazing reviews of this book. I think it's been usually books that are published in England get published a little bit later in America. And this book's been a big bestseller over in England, and it's gotten great reviews, so I think we just got it here. Anyway, How to Live, A Life of Montaigne, in one question and 20 attempts at an answer, Sarah Bakewell. So
yes.
This is I can't wait to read this book.
Yep, sounds good. And I did see a lot of, it was on all the best books of 2010 list too, so it's worth a try. My next book is called India Calling, an intimate portrait of a nation's remaking, and I can't possibly pronounce the author, Anand Jurid Haradis. It's obviously an Indian name, and I'm sorry for mispronouncing it. Maybe someone can call me and tell me how it's pronounced. This is an interesting way to learn about India's development, reawakening, and becoming very prominent in the world. That's what everybody talks about, is India's prominence in the world in finance and business these days. And this is what they said, an intimate portrait of a young man whose parents came from India when they were young, and he and his brother or sister, I can't remember, one other sibling, were brought up near Chicago in an American suburb. And he talks about how they were very Americanized, and but on special occasions they assumed the cloak of their Indian culture, and how they would go back to India with their parents every so often, and they would interact with their family and friends in India. And how when he graduated from college, he decided to, in a way, explore his roots, he actually went to India and took a job. This wasn't too long ago, a few years ago, and he talks about how India has changed, and particularly for young professionals. He was a young professional worker in India, and he spent several years over there. He stayed over there. Apparently, he married over there as well. But he talks about the contrast in his life and how India, they kind of used to, if not be ashamed, they just thought that India, his parents thought India was a place they needed to leave to acquire a better life, to have better opportunities. And now so many people think that India is the place to be because it's becoming very prominent in the world in all sorts of ways. And he talks about how the culture has changed. He talks about freedom of in a way from the social castes that were a big part of the culture, still are a big part of the culture, but what the Indians themselves still embrace and how they're evolving. And how it's a very different place than it was 15 or 20 years ago. So I really like the way it was written. Very easy to read, poetic in parts, very funny in parts. He talks about how what makes an American upbringing versus what is involved in India, and the striking juxtaposition of a young person's life in American suburbs versus the Indian culture. And I found it riveting, and I highly recommend it. I know we have several books, something like this, talking about India's 21st century India, in effect, compared to the old India. So, India Calling, an intimate portrait of a nation's remaking.
Okay, there's a lot of books coming out about India these
Yes.
days. All right, I had to go from Montaigne and How to Live to something a little more practical. These are just two books. These are two books on knitting I'm going to tell you about, but I'm just telling you about these as an example of, we have an excellent knitting section here, and the two that I'm going to tell you about I just took off the shelf. Down in our new book section is a whole shelf of brand new knitting books, and these are from the back. They're being processed. Again, there was about a dozen of them there. We have all kinds of knitting books. This one is a small book, and it opens up this way. The Knitter's Companion, hope you can see it, it opens up like this. The Knitter's Companion by Vicky Square. My wife is a knitter. She has this book in her knitting bag wherever she goes, whenever she's knitting, either in the house or out. This is her little thing. It's like a little reference book. If you just need a really quick guide to, and even I know these terms. I'm going to read you some terms. Even I know what they are. But if you just have a quick question about cast-ons, joining yarns, increases, decreases, bind-offs, blocking, and seaming. So even I know what those terms
Very
mean,
good.
but even though I can't do it. Hems and hemming, borders and edges, and a couple other little sections. And if you just need a quick reference, and like I say, Jill, my wife, she has this book with her at all times. And you can just go, each one has a little, you probably can't see that well, but
Has a
each one's
diagram.
illustrated. It has pictures. It tells you how to do it. It gives an example of what it's supposed to look like when it's done. Now this one, this one has two DVDs with it, which apparently obviously shows you how to do all these things. But even if you don't use a DVD, Jill has one with no DVD, but she constantly references this.
That's
so
great.
It's a good.
The DVDs, that's fantastic.
And I'm just, like I say, I'm showing us we have a great knitting section. I would say if you go upstairs, it's got to be 7 or 8 shelves worth. These are two new ones. The Knitter's Companion by Vicky Square. And this book, I hope I say it right, it's a certain style of knitting. It's called Entrelac, E-N-T-R-E-L-A-C, Interlock, The Essential Guide to Interlace Knitting. Now what this style of knitting is,
That's more advanced knitting.
I think it's very advanced.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can see it. It's a certain style of knitting where I don't want to say it gives the illusion. It looks like the things are like in a basket.
Right.
It looks like they're interwoven together. I don't think they're not actually interwoven underneath, but it looks like that. And this book tells you how to do this kind of style. Here's one on a pair of socks.
Oh, isn't
You
that
see
beautiful?
That. You get that little interweave kind of look. And again, it's got all the basics, how to do it. I'll see if I can find one more picture here that, like I say, all the different styles, no matter what it is, you know, they all have a different name, the rigid eyelet, a quadrifoil eyelet. So they all look like they're this inner weave, and you know, you just figure you can expand on these out into a sweater or socks or whatever. So I think I'm saying it right. And I would say this looks like, I think Jill was saying, this would probably be a bit advanced. The Essential Guide to Interlace Knitting, Entrelac, a style of knitting where it looks like it's all woven. So
How much did Jill cook you a special dinner in order to talk about those books?
I had her tell me what it meant. So for this one.
Okay.
Okay.
My next book is called Why Photographs Work. 52 Great Images, Who Made Them, What Makes Them Special, and Why, by George Barr. And the front cover is a mirror image of the title, Why Photographs Work. I thought this was fascinating because I don't know how to appreciate photographs. I don't know what makes one more, I don't know, more what? More likable, more important, more evolved, more technically challenged. I don't know about photography at all. When I was in college, I took an art history course, and that was very academic about how you evaluate a piece of art. This is geared to the layperson, not so much to the academic or the student of photography. It's more for people like me who want to learn how to appreciate and look at photography. So this photographer chose 52 images, 52 photographs. Some of them are manipulated in the sense that pictures are overlaid, photographs are overlaid, or they've manipulated them somehow on a computer. This is just an example of one of the photographs. And each of the photographs, the author, George, provides an analysis, and it's in layperson's language, which I appreciated. And also the photographer, it says the photographer's perspective offers information about how they see the picture, why they like the picture, what they were thinking when they took the picture, when they made the picture, and it offers a biography of the photographer, and it also offers a short technical description of what cameras were used and what computerized applications they used. And there's a combination of nature pictures. There's actual, as I presented to you before, a portrait of a African woman. There's some portraits. There's some overlay manipulations by computers, and fascinating images presented. So I highly recommend this. Why Photographs Work, by George Barr. 52 Great Images.
Okay. Now, Zina, there's a book. I'll give you a little test here before I talk about this book. There's a book currently on the bestseller list. It's been on the bestseller list for 3 months. It's still going strong. I couldn't bring it up today because all our copies are checked out. And this person, however, even though his book is on the bestseller list, died in 1910. Now, do you know who I'm talking about?
No. I would only think of maybe in the 1910. No, I don't know.
Well, anyway, all right, so there's a current bestseller, The Autobiography of Mark Twain.
Oh, I'm trying to read the book. There we go.
Which was just published, and it's on the bestseller list, and people are really fascinated with it because even though Mark Twain's autobiography has been out, there was certain parts, I don't know how much of it's in the new editions new, but he said he didn't want anything published for 100 years, so he died in 1910, so it was published at the end of last year.
All I'm thinking about is the Huckleberry Finn book that they're trying to take all the words out of and censor them right now.
So this book is the latest book from Library of America. I've talked about Library of America many times. What they do is they put out uniform editions of America's great authors, but they also have many books on themes.
Library of America is a publisher.
Yes, Library of America. Now, some of their special editions, besides just, say, Hawthorne or James Fenimore Cooper or Edith Wharton, They have special editions on topics, like there's one on baseball, there's one on New York City, there's one on...
War reporting,
Yeah,
right?
there's one on war report. So they have a lot of special ones. This is one of their special ones. It's called the Mark Twain Anthology, Great Writers on His Life and Works. What they are short little essays from famous writers starting in 1869 that wrote things about Mark Twain from all over the world, actually.
So he was well known and well respected during his
Oh,
lifetime.
yes, yes.
And sometimes that's rare.
Oh, yeah.
so.
Well, yes, he was the first, what William Dean Howells said, the Lincoln of our literature, Mark Twain.
All right.
But I'll read you some of the people who actually wrote about Mark Twain, and they're very interesting to skim through here. The first selection's from 1869 by David Ross Locke, and this is chronological. The last little essay in here is from 2008, Roy Blount Jr. And some of the people down through history that have written about Mark Twain on all different topics, I'll just read you a few. Let's see. Rudyard Kipling wrote something about Andrew Lang, Theodore Herzl, William Dean Howells, George Bernard Shaw, G.K. Chesterton, H.L. Mencken, Liu Xun, a Chinese author, Grant Wood, George Orwell. George Orwell wrote about Twain a few times. Bernard DeVoto, the famous American historian. Leslie Fielder, a very, very famous essay from 1948 called "Come Back to the Raft Again, Huck Honey." It's a very famous. It's a very, very famous essay. T.S. Eliot, W.H. Auden. You wouldn't think all these people would have written about Mark Twain, would
Yes,
you?
no.
Ralph Ellison, the author of Invisible
Wow,
Man.
so
Wallace
all his
Stegner.
contemporaries, a lot of contemporaries. That's-
Kenzaburo O, the Nobel Prize-winning Japanese author. Norman Mailer. And as we get into more modern times, Hal Holbrook, who of course played Mark Twain. Erica Jong. Ursula Le Guin, Toni Morrison, Gore Vidal, etc. Dick Gregory.
Wow.
So, if you're interested in Mark Twain, these are what all the people and more I just read. Little essays they wrote on Mark Twain all through history. So, and Mark Twain's in the news again with his autobiographies on the bestseller list. It's been on the bestseller list now for 3 months.
And it's
going
what's
strong.
what's his autobiography called? Is it
The
just
autobiography of Mark Twain.
It is, okay. I
So the
didn't
Mark
know that.
Twain Anthology, Great Writers on His Life and Works, a Library of America book. Zina?
From Upside Down, I was thinking the picture I thought was Thomas Jefferson with the bushy hair. My next book is called Fanny's Last Supper, Recreating One Amazing Meal from Fanny Farmer's 1896 Cookbook. It's written and presented, and the event was staged by Christopher Kimball, who is the host of America's Test Kitchen, and I think he's also started the Cooking Light magazine. I don't know where I got that from. Let's see. I don't see it here. Maybe I dreamed it up. I don't see that, but this is an accompaniment to a PBS show, and I haven't seen it scheduled on our local PBS station. I hope it will come sometime soon. He recreates a Victorian meal. And he and his wife own a Victorian home near Boston, and that's where Fanny Farmer was from. And he actually tries to recreate a lot of the cooking techniques that were used for a fancy meal. This is not, it's a Christmas dinner, a fancy Christmas dinner. It's not the servants' Christmas dinner. It's the upstairs people's Christmas dinner. And he actually tries to recreate the cooking methods. He has a stove from that era. The home they live in is, as I said, was from that era, and he had a coal-operated stove changed to be a wood-burning stove, and they actually have pictures of it in here. And I remember my grandmother's stove. It looked exactly like that stove, and they put wood in it. And it was to me, this is fascinating. Social history. through food. I think I've brought up a few other books in the past on our show with that perspective, and I found it very interesting to learn about how the foods were prepared, how difficult it was to obtain a lot of the food. He talks about beets and how the beets from that there were different kinds of beets, and how the standard way of cooking beets was to cook it for 4 hours, and sometimes it was still tough. He talks, the gruesome part of, to me, was the discussion of making mock turtle soup, which is actually, and actually using the head of a calf, boiling the head of a calf. And it's fascinating when he talks about how they learned to do that and how they erred, they made mistakes, and but it's fascinating to talk about jellies, how they made jellies from red currants, and why red currants are better than other currants. It sounds too foodie for some people, but it really isn't, because his writing is excellent, and he puts all sorts of historical notes within the food history. So I highly recommend this, Fanny's Last Supper, recreating our One Amazing Meal from Fanny Farmer's 1896 cookbook.
I just read a good review of that.
Yes.
And,
yep. It is very entertaining.
Now here's a book. I was hesitant to talk about it. I'm still not sure about this book, but it's got a wonderful title, and it's the kind of book that I suppose could garner a lot of discussion. I'm laughing because we talk about, this show is about books. We talk about books, both past and present. And as librarians, Zina and I are, in some sense, our lives revolve around books, I guess you could say. This book is called 10 Books That Screwed Up the World.
Wait a minute, there's a subtitle there.
And 5 Others That Didn't Help. So it's basically 15 books.
Is this tongue-in-cheek?
No, it's a very serious. It's a serious book. I'll read you some of the books, and you'll probably get the idea where the guy's coming from. I don't know. I didn't read it. I was just skimming it. You might be able to tell. The introduction's called Ideas Have Consequences. So he's got 3 sections here. One is 4 books, and these are all famous books in history. You'll know them. If you're watching, you'll know them. And he gives a little thing why he thinks this book was better off not written in history. Anyway, part 1's called Preliminary Screw-Ups, and he has chosen to write about The Prince by Machiavelli, Discourse on Method by Descartes, Leviathan, I think Thomas Hobbes wrote that. And then chapter 4 is the book Discourse on the Origin and Foundations of Inequality Among Men, I think was Rousseau. I'm not sure about that one. So he goes through why these, Rousseau, why these books were better off not written, and how they affected history, how they affected people who read them, and maybe tried to, later on when I read the other ones, put some of their ideas into motion. So it looks actually kind of interesting.
I think that's great, that the idea that books can change the world. I mean,
this is unfortunately 10 books.
I know, but it changed.
So the second section is called 10 Big Screw-Ups, and this is the order of this section. The Manifesto of the Communist Party. Now again, I don't think he's saying the book. He's saying their ideas.
The ideas.
So I think you get the idea. Utilitarianism, was that John Stuart Mill? The Descent of Man by Darwin, Beyond Good and Evil by Nietzsche, The State of Revolution, Lenin wrote, I think that was Lenin. The Pivot of Civilization, a Margaret Sanger book.
Oh.
Mein Kampf, Hitler. The Future of Illusion, a Sigmund Freud book. Coming of Age in Samoa, Margaret Mead. Sexual Behavior in the Human Male, the Alfred Kinsey book. There's controversy about that book. There's always been controversy about that book. And the third section, this book gets its own section. When I tell you this, Zina, I don't want you to jump out of your chair, but this book gets its own section.
About feminists.
This book gets its own section, and the section's called Dishonorable Mention, the 15th book, The Feminine Mystique.
I knew it.
So anyway, this guy, obviously, it's published by Regnery Publishing. They publish a lot of conservative-type authors, so maybe that's the bent of this.
That's good, though. I mean, it's good.
Well, he says people should read these and be aware of them and try to see, you know, I think he's trying to see, like, for example, he's saying if you look at, I'm sure more people have died under communism than anything else. Now, did the book cause it? I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's sort of, but it looks like an interesting premise. 10 books that screwed up the world and 5 others that didn't help. The author's called Benjamin Wiker, W-I-K-E-R. So he's also the author of Moral Darwinism, How We Became Hedonists. So,
well, you know,
this looks like an interesting book.
I think it would be interesting if it's not too predictable. Some of it, you know, the writing's good. I'm just going to mention two books quickly because I know that we're running out of time. So I'm not going to talk at length about these, but I'll just mention them. This first one is Paris Was Ours, 32 Writers Reflect on the City of Light by Penelope Rowlands. And I thought this was amusing. It was interesting. Everybody talks, all 32 writers talk about their initial impressions of Paris, and they all spent a great deal of time in Paris and how their views changed gradually to the reality of living in the French capital. And so it's basically the good things and the bad things, but the writing is excellent and they're short essays for the most part, and they talk about different parts of French culture. It could be parenting, it could be food, it could be traffic, it could be dealing with the bureaucracy. So I recommend this. Paris Was Ours, 32 Writers Reflect on the City of Light by Penelope Rowlands. The second one that I want to read is called The Haves and the Have-Nots by Branko Milanovic, A Brief and Idiosyncratic History of Global Inequality. It sounds really heavy and solemn and too profound, but the chapter headings will tell you that it's very interesting and worth your while. It's called Romance and Riches. This is, the chapter one is about inequality among individuals within a nation. So who was the richest person ever? How unequal was the Roman Empire? Was socialism really egalitarian? Who gains from fiscal redistribution? Will China survive in 2048? And then Unequal Nations is the second chapter, was Mark Led Astray. How unequal is today's world? How much of your income is determined by birth? Should the whole world be composed of gated communities? And then the 3 generations of Obama. So he talks about how rich, just how rich Mr. Darcy really was in Pride and Prejudice, how much Anna Karenina of the novel gained by falling in love, how wealthy ancient Romans compared to today's super rich. So I think it's very interesting premise to compare as people proclaim that the income distribution in our world today is so extreme. So this is kind of a history of the past in terms of income and wealth distribution. The Haves and the Have-Nots by Branko Milanovic.
Okay, I'll go quick too because I know we're getting near the end. This is a new biography of Louisa May Alcott by Susan Cheever, John Cheever's daughter, who's written many books. There's been, I would say in the last 5 years, 5 or 6 years, there's been several books written about not only Louisa May Alcott, author of Little Women. There's been books about the family. I guess her father, Bronson Alcott, was quite the character. And of course, they all hung out. I guess I don't know if they used that term back then, but the Alcotts, Emerson, Thoreau, Nathaniel Hawthorne, and there's another woman. They were, people say, well, they were like the first hippies or whatever. But the Transcendentalists, they were all in Concord. They were all friends. They had all kinds of stuff. But the father sounds really like an interesting guy. There was a biography of the father a couple years ago that just got great reviews.
She didn't have an easy life.
And this book is about Louisa May Alcott. The subtitle here says a personal biography because Susan Cheever, I was a big fan of her and her work. Susan Cheever a few years ago wrote a book called American Bloomsbury, which was about all the people I just mentioned and all their interactions and whatever. But she returned to this because I think Louisa May Alcott is one of her personal favorites. That's why she calls it a personal biography. And Susan Cheever, a wonderful writer. I've read some of her books. She's a really wonderful writer. And this book's getting good reviews. And like I say, there was a whole big thing on PBS recently, or the last year or so, about Louisa May Alcott. She's somehow coming back for some reason. But the whole family And that whole crew that hung out there, the Transcendentalists, Thoreau and I think Louisa May Alcott and Thoreau may have, there's been, I don't know if they had an affair or whatever, but apparently they were all pretty close, that whole group. So here's the latest in a book that got good reviews, Louisa May Alcott, A Personal Biography by Susan Cheever. Well, that's it for this time. For so many books, so little time, and we'll see you next time.